Last week, US President Donald Trump made an official visit to Malaysia from October 26 to 27, 2025, as part of the 47th ASEAN Summit in Kuala Lumpur, and within days, the trip sent shockwaves across Asia's economic map. Malaysia emerged with a surprise trade deal. Singapore's markets reacted almost immediately, and Indonesia, long seen as a neutral player, suddenly found itself in Washington's strategic spotlight. But behind the official photos and diplomatic language, something far more significant was unfolding. Trump's Asia trip wasn't just about foreign policy. It was an economic chess move, a calculated effort to reshape how trade, investment, and geopolitical influence flow across the world's fastest-growing region. The question now is, who actually gained from it and who's quietly paying the price? Because this single trip may have just redrawn the balance of power in Asia's trillion-dollar economy. Chapter 1. Malaysia's Big Win and Hidden Risks. For Malaysia, Trump's visit wasn't just another diplomatic handshake. It was an economic breakthrough years in the making. During the 47th ASEAN Summit in Kuala Lumpur, Washington quietly signed a new bilateral economic cooperation framework with Malaysia, a deal meant to deepen supply chain integration and reduce U.S. reliance on China for key manufacturing inputs. In practical terms, this means American firms could soon shift parts of their semiconductor and electronics production into Malaysia, especially across Penang's tech parks and Johor's industrial corridor. For Malaysia, it's validation, a clear signal that Washington now sees it as a strategic bridge in Southeast Asia's next industrial wave. And on paper, the benefits are huge. Foreign investment inflows from major U.S. chip and automation companies, job creation in high-value manufacturing and digital infrastructure, technology transfer opportunities that could boost Malaysia's innovation capacity. But beneath the optimism, economists are warning of strategic dependencies, the kind that often come quietly, long after the photo ops fade. Because when a smaller economy becomes part of a superpower's supply chain, it inherits both the benefits and the vulnerabilities of that alliance. If US-China tensions flare again, Malaysia could find itself caught in the middle, pressured to align with Washington's export controls or risk secondary sanctions. And that's not theoretical. We saw similar patterns with Vietnam and Taiwan, where supply chain integration came with heavy political expectations. There's also a deeper question. Will Malaysia's local firms truly benefit, or will they become subcontractors in a US-dominated network, locked into low-margin assembly roles while the higher-value design and IP stay abroad? In other words, this partnership could fast-track Malaysia's industrial growth, but it might also limit its economic sovereignty. Because once you plug into the US supply chain, you don't just trade goods, you trade influence. Chapter 2. Singapore's Strategic Dilemma: Capital Inflows or Collateral Damage. While Malaysia grabbed headlines with its new US trade framework, Singapore quietly became one of the biggest indirect beneficiaries of Trump's visit. Almost overnight, analysts noticed a spike in investor interest toward Singapore's financial markets. Whenever Washington makes a strategic move in Asia, money looks for safety, and Singapore is often the first destination. US multinationals began exploring regional headquarters relocations, and fund managers signaled renewed confidence in Singapore's role as the financial nerve center of Southeast Asia. In simple terms, as Malaysia opens new manufacturing pipelines, Singapore could handle the flow of capital, data and logistics that power them. And that's the beauty and the burden of Singapore's position. Because while capital inflows look like a win, they also pull the city-state deeper into US-China competition. Trump's latest rhetoric on economic loyalty, urging American partners to align on trade restrictions, puts Singapore in a tough spot. It's a nation that thrives on neutrality and open access. But the new geopolitical reality makes that balancing act increasingly fragile. A former diplomat put it bluntly: Singapore can't afford to choose sides, but both sides are now demanding a choice. And that's the core dilemma. Align too closely with Washington, and Singapore risks retaliatory friction from Beijing, possibly in digital trade, data sharing, or tourism flows. Stay too neutral and it could lose out on US investment guarantees or emerging defense tech partnerships that Washington is offering its trusted allies. On top of that, rising U.S. interest rates and shifting capital regulations mean Singapore's banks may face volatility in foreign deposits, especially from Chinese and Middle Eastern clients looking for stability amid geopolitical noise. In short, Trump's Asia trip left Singapore in a paradox. It gained investor confidence but also inherited new strategic exposure. In this region, neutrality is no longer passive, it's an expensive balancing act that requires constant recalibration. Chapter 3: Indonesia's leverage. If Malaysia secured trade and Singapore drew capital, Indonesia gained leverage, the kind that shifts global attention. In 2025, Washington finally realized what Jakarta had quietly built: control over the world's most critical resource for the green economy, nickel. Trump's visit didn't produce a headline deal, but it sparked talks of a critical minerals partnership, aiming to secure U.S. access to Indonesia's massive reserves before Beijing dominates the supply chain. It's a smart move by both sides. For the U.S., it's about building a new energy alliance. For Indonesia, it's about cashing in on strategic neutrality, the maintaining trade with China while courting American investors in EV and battery production. But that balancing act cuts both ways. China sees U.S. deals as a threat. Washington expects loyalty in return, and history shows playing both sides often comes at a price. Still, the payoff is big. Indonesia's nickel exports just hit record highs, and new joint ventures with U.S. firms could help it move from exporting raw ore to producing high-value battery components. If Malaysia builds the factories and Singapore manages the money, Indonesia now fuels the system. But unless it reinvests this boom into technology and education, the power it's enjoying today could fade as fast as a market cycle. Chapter 4: ASEAN's identity crisis, bilateral wins, collective weakness. Trump's Asia strategy made one thing clear: bilateral deals now trump regional consensus. Each nation, from Malaysia to Indonesia to Singapore, walked away with national gains. But together, ASEAN's collective voice grew quieter. By negotiating country by country, Washington expands its influence while China doubles down on multilateral trade frameworks, like RCEP and the Belt and Road. The result, Southeast Asia is being reshaped not as a bloc, but as a battleground of competing alliances. If ASEAN can't adapt, building stronger economic coordination and a unified digital policy, it risks becoming a spectator in its own region. Chapter 5: The Tariff Trap. Trump's upcoming tariffs 2.0 may be aimed at China, but the real collateral damage could hit Southeast Asia. Here's why. Many ASEAN economies assemble or process goods for U.S. markets using Chinese-made components. That means even if the product carries a "Made in Malaysia" or "Made in Vietnam" label, it could still be taxed under the new U.S. trade rules. For Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore, this is a serious risk. Their export growth over the past 5 years came from absorbing supply chains leaving China. But if Washington broadens its tariff definitions, that boom could stall overnight. In short, Southeast Asia might get caught in the crossfire of the next trade war, not because of what it makes, but because of where its parts come from. This could reset Asia's entire export map. The big picture, Asia's economic map, just shifted. Trump's week in Asia wasn't a goodwill tour. It was a strategic recalibration, a quiet reshaping of power lines across the region. The U.S. isn't saying containment out loud, but that's exactly what this is. A plan to redraw Asia's supply chains around trusted partners and away from China's orbit. Malaysia walked away with exposure and new opportunities. Singapore gained capital but inherited new pressure. And Indonesia, perhaps for the first time, realized its leverage in the global economy. Each victory, though, comes with strings attached. The trade deals, investment flows, and security ties all lead back to one question: how much autonomy can Southeast Asia keep in a world that's quietly dividing again? For ASEAN, the challenge is no longer if it will be pulled between powers, but how much control it can retain as the new economic map takes shape. So was Trump's week in Asia a win for Southeast Asia? Maybe, but it's the kind of win that comes with fine print. For nations like Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia, the next few years won't just be about growth. They'll be about balance. Because in a world where every handshake comes with a headline, neutrality might just be the most powerful currency left.